So this is the ninth film in the Rethinking Existentialism series, and in this film we're going to start to think about the ethics of existentialism. As so far, these films have mostly been focused on the core claim of existentialism that existence precedes essence, on the claim that human existence is structured in such a way that individuals don't have fixed personalities. There are no fixed characteristics of any particular group of people, and that there's no such thing as human nature, and that instead our behaviour is motivated by the reasons that we find in our experience, but that those reasons themselves reflect the values that we already endorse, and that we can change. And our focus has partly been on the implications of that theory, particularly as it's developed in different ways by Sartre in his initial form of existentialism, and by Beauvoir in a form of existentialism that Sartre eventually subscribes to by the end of the 1940s, the start of the 1950s. We've had some ethical implications in those films, particularly in the last film, the film on Frantz Fanon about race. But now we're going to focus directly on the ethical problem, because existentialism is designed as an ethical theory. That's the point of it, right? It's designed as an answer to what Socrates identified as the basic question of philosophy, which is how should one live? How should we live? And that's the point of existentialism. It's not simply an add-on to its core theory that it tries to develop ethical or moral implications. That's the whole motivation for looking into the structure of human existence in the first place. Now, some of these ethical implications are psychoanalytic or psychiatric implications. How should one live? Isn't solely a moral question. It's also a question about how best to live, how to what attitudes and approaches to life are going to give you a more enjoyable life and avoid the sources of distress and anxiety and despair that can blight people's lives. But it also has a moral dimension. It has a dimension of concern with how we should treat one another and whether there are any acceptable limits to the way in which we treat one another, or any limits to the acceptable ways of treating one another. And in existentialism, the basic ethical idea is that there is a fundamental virtue that they call authenticity, and that this is a virtue that we all ought to have. So authenticity is the opposite of bad faith. Bad faith is often referred to by the name inauthenticity. Bad faith is the denial of the human condition. So bad faith primarily is about trying to see yourself and other people as having fixed natures, as having fixed essences, and to see yourself as having a particular kind of fixed nature that you value. Authenticity, on the other hand, is the recognition of the way human existence really is, or really is according to existentialism anyway. So it's living in light of the knowledge that existence precedes essence, and that there are no fixed essences or fixed natures, and that people's behaviour is ultimately just determined by the values that they endorse and that they can change. Now, the idea that authenticity is a virtue, the idea that it is a good thing to be authentic for all of us and that we ought to be authentic, faces an immediate problem there, because it looks like it doesn't fit with the existentialist conception of human existence, right? So if values are just things that are enshrined in our projects, and that the reasons that we experience in the world just reflect the values that we choose and that we could choose otherwise, then it's not clear what reason there could be for us all that requires us to embrace authenticity. right? What's wrong with bad faith? From the perspective of bad faith, what reason could the inauthentic person have to give up inauthenticity that requires them to give up inauthenticity in favour of authenticity? And that problem is essentially, I think, the existentialist form of the problem of absurdity, right? So if the reasons that we have are all based on our values, and our values are chosen, and we can change our values, then it looks like, although we're committed to the values that we have, and although we do recognise the reasons that we find in the world, ultimately there's no justification for that. Right? We're committed to values that we can't justify. We're committed to values that we could just swap for other values. And that, as Simone de Beauvoir brings out very clearly, I think, in Pyrrhus and Cineas, which is her book from 1944, is the problem of absurdity. It's absurd to be committed to a value, to valuing something, when you could just give it up and replace it with something else, when you've got no reason to, there's no justification for it, but nevertheless it's a commitment. And she thinks that it's inescapable that we're committed to our values, and so does Sartre, because that's the core of existentialism. That's what it means to say existence precedes essence, that we have these values that we've chosen and that we endorse and that we're committed to, and that those values animate our experience of the world as a field of reasons that we then respond to in our behaviour. So there, in essence, is the kind of problem of ethics for existentialists. Their conception of reasons and values looks like it entails that there could not be any reason to prefer one set of values to another. No reason to prefer one set of projects to another, because reasons are rooted in those projects in the first place. And as a result, it looks like there can be no moral constraints on behaviour at all. It doesn't matter what set of projects you have, right? It doesn't matter whether those projects include the project of bad faith or whether they include the project of authenticity. It can't do, because the only reasons that there could be why it would are reasons that are themselves grounded in your projects. They're not reasons that are objective, because that's not where reasons come from. The reasons that you experience in the world just reflect the values you already have. That's the problem. How can it be solved? I think there are two ways of trying to solve that problem in the classic or existentialist literature of the 1940s and early 1950s. And in this film, I'm going to talk about one of them, which is the eudaimonist approach, what I call the eudaimonist approach. And in the next film, I'm going to talk about the more Kantian approach. I think the more Kantian approach is more promising. So this film is about why eudaimonism, within the context of existentialism, isn't gonna be able to ground moral constraints. It's not going to be able to give us a reason to be authentic. What is eudaimonism? Eudaimonism is an approach to ethics which is prevalent in ancient Greek thought and has been influential in Western thought ever since, which focuses primarily on well-being, or what's sometimes called happiness, on living a good life, which isn't necessarily the same thing as an enjoyable life, though enjoyment may be part of what makes a life a good life. So it's an approach to ethics that is primarily focused on living well. Now, in the last film on Frantz Fanon, we looked at the ways in which Fanon thinks that inauthenticity can generate distress, anxiety, despair, and other kind of psychological problems. And in Fanon's analysis, what he focuses on is the way that those problems are generated by racism, particularly by the racism that he sees engendered by colonialism. So those are forms of racism that deem groups of people to have essential characteristics, racial characteristics, right? So groups of people are categorized as inferior or superior, and that inferiority or superiority is an essential characteristic of the individual, one that there's nothing they can do anything about. Right? It's part of their nature. As a white colonizer, you're part of the superior group. As a black colonized person, you're part of the inferior group. And on the racist picture, that's just the way it is. On the existentialist picture, of course, there are no fixed properties, there are no fixed essences, and that's why Fanon thinks that we can overcome that racism, or we should overcome that racism by embracing authenticity, by seeing the world correctly through existentialist lens, of seeing individuals as having no fixed personality traits at all, and as a result of seeing that there is no such thing as an ethnic nature or a racial group in that sense, and that there's no such thing as essential characteristics of gender either, or essential characteristics of human nature. Right? Now, so that's a eudaimonist argument, because he thinks that the racial categorizations cause distress. They cause people problems, and that authenticity is a way of overcoming those problems. So as a result, life is better if you embrace authenticity, if you see that this idea of essential characteristics is false, and if you work towards overcoming the kind of deeply ingrained commitment to the idea of essential characteristics. So it's not just a question of changing your mind; it's a question of slowly kind of growing into the existentialist outlook by sedimenting that idea in place of the already deeply instilled idea that there are racial characteristics and that there are essential properties of individuals and of groups. Now, Fanon's focus, I mean, Fanon, as I said, is a psychiatrist, right? His focus here is on overcoming a psychiatric problem. That's his argument, right? He's not trying to give us a general moral philosophy. So it's unfair to criticize him for not succeeding in that regard. But it is interesting that, and I think important for our purposes, that you couldn't, I think, build a general moral philosophy directly out of that critique of colonialism and racism. And by that I mean, look, what he's given us is a reason why you should embrace authenticity if you are suffering from problems which are engendered by colonialism and by racism. And he focuses on the problems that these cause to black men, but he also says that they're not the only people who suffer problems as a result of colonialism and racism. Now, the shortcoming of this approach then is that if you try to build a moral theory out of it, you're not going to succeed, because it doesn't give reason to embrace authenticity except through overcoming the psychic distress caused by racism and colonialism. So if you're not suffering from that distress to any great degree, then it looks like you don't have any reason to go through the process of sedimenting a new way of seeing the world. And so as a result, it doesn't give us what I call the imperative of authenticity. It doesn't give us a general reason why everyone ought to embrace authenticity. It simply recommends authenticity as a way of curing and preventing particular kinds of psychic distress that some people suffer. And that, of course, was all Fanon was trying to do. Sartre, on the other hand, offers a similar kind of argument where he thinks, I think, that he can draw a moral conclusion that we all ought to embrace authenticity, because he thinks that inauthenticity, bad faith, causes a general problem for everybody who's in it, regardless of their social status or other aspects of their social context. And this is the problem that we looked at in the film number 6 in this series, which is a film about his play Huis Clos. Right? This is the idea that, as Garcin puts it in that play famously, hell is other people. Right? Sartre's message here is that relationships with other people will always be tainted, will always be problematic, will always be, as he puts it, hell, if they're undertaken within the framework of inauthenticity, within the framework of bad faith, right? Because within that framework, you, if you're in bad faith, are always trying to establish a particular fixed essence, a particular fixed nature as being yours, and one that you value highly. In Garcin's case, he's trying to establish that he's a macho hero. Estelle is trying to establish herself as a model of femininity, as classically understood. But you're perennially under threat from the fact that other people don't necessarily see you that way. They can interpret your actions in other ways, and will, as a result, be perpetually presenting evidence that undermines your project of trying to establish yourself as being a certain kind of person. Whereas you can overcome that problem, thinks Sartre, by embracing authenticity, right? I mean, so if you're not trying to establish a particular fixed essence of yours in the first place, if all you're trying to do is pursue the particular projects that you value in clear understanding and clear knowledge that that's all there is to human existence, then other people, he thinks, are not hell. So he thinks that this is a general argument for authenticity for everybody. Why? Because it provides everybody who embraces inauthenticity, everybody in bad faith, is provided with a reason why they should give up that project in favour of the opposite, authenticity. So that means everybody has a reason to be authentic. The authentic people already have that reason grounded in their values, and the inauthentic people have this reason grounded in the problems that their inauthenticity generate for their relationships with other people. It's kind of neat, right? But again, I don't think it's enough, because all it can do is provide you with one reason among many others. So you've got, if the argument works, I mean, forget the further question of whether actually it makes sense at all to say that bad faith necessarily poisons your relationships with other people in this way. But even if it does, is that enough reason to overcome the project of bad faith? Well, it looks like you've got plenty of reason going the other way. For one thing, you already value that idea of yourself as having a particular fixed nature, so that gives you reason to keep on trying to establish it. For another thing, it looks like once you accept the idea of sedimentation, overcoming such a deeply ingrained value and such a deeply ingrained project is a major task. It involves time and effort and resources. It involves letting go of other things that you value. It may well involve social costs, because Sartre thinks that bad faith is a socially engendered project, that we're all under pressure from society to endorse the value of bad faith. So, authenticity comes at a certain cost. You have strong reasons, therefore, already based in your existing projects, not to convert from those projects to the project of authenticity. The fact that Sartre can show you that you also have a reason to do so doesn't seem to be enough. What he needs is to show that that reason is overriding, that reason necessarily outweighs any reasons you have to continue with bad faith. And he hasn't shown that, and I don't think he can. I think that the eudaimonist perspective, as a result, it simply isn't going to provide us with what we need here, or it isn't going to provide existentialism with what it needs, which is an argument for why everybody, regardless of what their existing projects are, must embrace authenticity. The best it can do, the eudaimonist approach, I think, is to show that everybody has some reason to do so, to embrace authenticity. But that's not enough, because the reason might be outweighed by other reasons. Okay. So that's why eudaimonism won't work. I said earlier that there are two approaches in existentialist literature of the 1940s and 1950s to establishing the virtue of authenticity. That's one of them. And as I say, I think that it essentially can't work, because the best it can do is provide a reason for authenticity, not an overriding reason. The other approach is the more Kantian approach that is found in Simone de Beauvoir's essay, Pyrrhus and Cineas, which she first published in 1944, and that argues not on the basis of our existing projects themselves, right? It's not trying to show that the project of bad faith generates problems for us that we that we want to solve, but rather tries to show that as a result of having the kind of existence that we have, as a result of the fact that your existence precedes your essence, you're under an obligation to recognize and value that freedom in yourself and other people. And I will explain that argument in the next film.